All right, good morning. Thank you all for joining us today. We are excited to share some of the critical internal and external risk to be mindful of on your CMMC compliance journey based on our experience and expertise. We are certainly hopeful the information we share this morning will help you not only mitigate any of these potential threats, but also maximize your opportunity for CMMC compliance success. I'm Elizabeth Niedringhaus, President and CEO of SSE. Excited to be joined today by Bob Duffy, SSE's COO, and Charlie Shudo, SSE's CISO and CTO, as well as Jack Walbrand, who is of counsel at Bryan Cave, Layton, and Posner. Thank you all for joining me. They will be co-presenting. For those of you that may not be familiar with SSE, just to share a little bit of background, SSE was actually founded back in 1966, and Susan Elliott was determined to get in on the ground floor of the PC in 1983. It, of course, started as a training organization as companies back then were new to personal computers and then quickly evolved into IT services. We actually began to develop our cybersecurity expertise as a fellow defense contractor back in 2009. We are proud of the fact that we've been ISO certified since 2013. And most proud of our CMMC Level 2 certification that was achieved back in November of 2024 through a joint surveillance voluntary assessment. So CMMC and SSE, if you're asking yourself why, it's really the unique combination of not only our cybersecurity expertise built since 2009, but also our experience as an IT managed service provider serving companies for nearly 20 years, as well as our mature processes, as I mentioned, with our ISO certification. And finally, we are walking in your same shoes as a defense contractor. Our agenda for this morning is to quickly review the rulemaking and where we stand, as well as the requirements for every defense contractor. And then, as I mentioned, walk through the internal and external risks. One of those related to misrepresenting compliance, as well as the work that you are maybe doing with external partners, be it a CSP, cloud service provider, or an MSP, managed service provider. Then we will quickly walk through our solution set and leave time, we hope, at the end for question and answer. If not, please use the Q&A button throughout the webinar, and we will do our best to respond as we go. So hopping into the review of the requirements and rulemaking, just at this late date in the game, if you are unclear, just to level set with everyone that CMMC will apply to all DoD solicitations and contracts with every defense contractor and subcontractor who processes, stores, and transmits either FCI, Federal Contract Information, or CUI, Controlled Unclassified Information. So just to enumerate on that, that includes all new DoD solicitations, new DoD procurement instruments like task orders or delivery orders, all option periods on a contract, and again, as I mentioned, all subcontracts. It is the responsibility of the prime to flow these requirements down through their supply chain. The only exception is, again, exclusively for commercial off-the-shelf items. Now into the requirements, and again, this is a significant eye chart, and I don't want to gobble up a lot of time going through this. We will send out the slides at the end of the briefing today. But on this slide, of course, we show the requirement at each of the levels of CMMC, what is necessary and required as part of a certification assessment and the timing of that, as well as what is required annually to affirm your ongoing compliance. And now to the rulemaking. Just a reminder that, of course, the Title 32 rule went into effect on December 16th, 2024, that codified the CMMC program and allowed certified third-party assessor organizations to begin assessments. And as we heard last night on the call with the Cyber AB, the final piece of the puzzle, the Title 48 rule, is expected to be effective the end of this, expected to be finalized the end of the summer and effective on October 1st or the beginning of October. And of course, the Title 48 rule defines the CMMC acquisition requirements and mandates compliance to receive award of new contracts. So the final piece of the puzzle is close. Now, Bob, I want to turn it over to you so you can walk through what we anticipate in terms of a phased implementation when the Title 48 rule goes into effect.
Thank you, Elizabeth. One of the most common questions that we get asked is how much time do I have? When will all of this take effect? Based on what we know now, and as Elizabeth shared, what the Cyber AB indicated last night, let's look at this timeline. We know there's going to be a phased implementation that is anticipated, but assuming what the Cyber AB shared holds true, that we could have a final rule end of summer with a tentative, let's call it, effective date of October 1. On that effective date, phase 1 would begin, and that will require self-assessments for level 1 and level 2 for all new contracts. Now, that is a CMMC self-assessment. That is different than what you may have done previously, specific to NIST 800-171, and submitted to SPRS, in that when this switch flips to CMMC, those self-assessments need to be darn near perfect. There is a minimum score requirement of 88. There is also greater scrutiny and restrictions on the use of POAMs. POAMs will only be allowed for the one-point controls, and they will be strictly time-bound. So something to think about as you're doing your compliance planning and looking ahead to when this takes effect. Is your organization ready to submit a scored self-assessment, a CMMC self-assessment, as soon as Q4 of this year? 1 year after phase 1, phase 2 would begin. This would be where level 2 certifications from a C3PAO will be required on select new contracts. We don't know yet which new contracts that will be, but if you expect to be bidding on new solicitations, and that will require level 2. For example, you have NIST 800-171 now, you should expect level 2. You should plan on getting certified by a C3PAO in early 2026, just to make sure you are ready. Phase 3 begins a year after phase 2, and that is when we would see the certification audit requirements be phased into the existing contracts. Phase 4, a year after that, would be where all DoD contracts and solicitations would have the applicable CMMC requirements. So a lot of times folks will see this information, they'll think about their existing contracts, and they'll say, okay, phase 3 existing contracts, I've got till 2027. Not if you plan on doing anything with new solicitations, contracts, etc. Those requirements will be starting this year based on everything we now know from the Cyber AB. So let's talk a little bit about misrepresenting NIST 800-171 and CMMC compliance and get into a little bit of those risks. Quick question, can't do a show of hands, but Does anyone know what these following amounts have in common, other than being very large sums of money? Give you a second to think about. These have all been relatively recent, two of them very recent, cyber fraud settlements with the DOJ's Civil Cyber Fraud Initiative that launched in 2021. Kind of launched quietly, but it specifically said at the time of launch it was going to be utilizing the False Claims Act and claims brought forth by whistleblowers to go after cybersecurity misrepresentation of compliance. What we now start to see is some of these actions that DoD, in conjunction with DOJ, have taken are becoming much more public. A few very large settlements in which the whistleblower received a large portion of the amount. So something, as we dig into these details, all organizations need to be aware of how these organizations misstepped, what those pitfalls are. We're very pleased to have Jack Walburn with us today to dig into this in a little more detail. Jack, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Good morning, Bob. So stepping back to go forward, Bob has identified civil settlements, Civil False Claims Act settlements for cybersecurity violations. That calls for stepping back and asking, well, what is the FCA? What is the False Claims Act? It dates back to the Civil War. It was a response to false claims for bad supplies provided to the Union Army. To this day, it provides for civil penalties for each offense, each billing, and civil damages in addition up to 3 times the amount the government pays. In the case of a contract which is induced by a false representation, that is 3 times the entire set of contract payments. Critically, it provides both for government actions and for private actions by whistleblowers who can bring suit on behalf of the government. Those are called KETAM actions. And the whistleblowers who bring them are entitled to a share of the recovery, as much as 25%. And don't be misled. As you turn to the next slide in a moment and talk about knowing offenses. Don't be misled, because knowing and willful cybersecurity violations also can be subject to serious criminal penalties. Bob, next slide. So in order to appreciate the provisions of your contracts on cybersecurity, you need to think about what the elements of a false claim are as we will next approach the provisions. A false claim simply is either knowingly submitting a false billing or knowingly using a false record or statement to support a false billing. Critically, looking at the center of that slide, knowing can include not only actual knowledge, but deliberate ignorance of a truth or falsity. Just not asking your IT guy what your score is before you submit a representation that you comply. Deliberate ignorance or reckless disregard is enough. As I said, a claim is simply making a request or demand for money or payment or property from the government by a contractor, or through a prime contractor by a subcontractor. All subs are covered now as a result of an amendment a couple decades ago. Next slide, Bob. The DoD, in pursuit of getting contractor cybersecurity compliance, has since 2013 been increasingly specifically framing the contract representations so that they serve as predicates for False Claims Act suits if one does not comply. Look at the provisions. First, from 2016 on, the -7008 clause has contractors representing that they will implement NIST 800-171. From 2017, 7012 clause, they shall implement as soon as practical, but not later than, look at that date, December 2017. Well, plainly, DoD perceived that notwithstanding those representations, some contractors weren't complying. So we get in November 2020, the -7019 clause where people have to self-submit their score, but also critically identify their SSP and the expected completion date. That is, represent an expected completion date. It's a representation. And now, coming into the third quarter, we expect to see the -7021 clause implemented. Simply and expressly, as a condition of contract award, it will require, in the first place, a current self-assessment. And it's a self-assessment, as Bob indicated, essentially of full compliance. The clause also includes a representation that that compliance will be maintained for the duration of the contract. It requires an affirmation at the time of the award in the first place and annually thereafter by a senior company official. Think of all those representations that could be false or reckless or with willful disregard. Not next and last slide for me, Bob. These are the specific allegations that were contained in the three cases Bob mentioned. I'm not going to do them all. You can see the check marks going across. False representing compliance with NIST 800-171. And in the case of Morse Corp, though not laid out here, also of the 7012 clause by not having a FedRAMP compliance for a public cloud. False reporting in SPRS, lack of an SSP, failure to implement required controls. And I just pause to say, look at the Morse Corp line. They didn't do anything that they should have done. And as you will see, a whistleblower brought the suit on behalf of the government. The government took it over. It settled the case for $4.6 million and paid the whistleblower $851,000. That's why the false claims cyber allegations are serious. Back to you, Bob.
Jack, thank you. You touched on that Morse Corp so well there. We'll just take a quick deep dive to just highlight again, because we think the allegations were so significant and provide such a template for learning for all firms going forward. Again, that the principal exposure risk highlighted in that Morse case was failing to comply with the contract requirements, failing to use the promised protective IT tools, especially the cloud tools, as Jack just noted, the non-compliant cloud email system from 2018 to 2022. Again, falsely reporting the NIST 800-171 score in SPRS, even after they had had a third-party assessment that flagged the score in the air. So again, making sure that that stays current and up to date as you've done it yourself or following any assessment. And of course, the other risk is the current knowledge of an employee who could turn around and act as a whistleblower. As we've said, the whistleblower in the Morse Court case was the head of security and the FSO, facility security officer, who'd been with Morse Corp for over 2 years. So moving on again, Bob, just to turn it over to you.
Thank you, Elizabeth. And Charlie and I are going to walk you guys through some common pitfalls as it relates to compliance. In the dozens and dozens of gap assessments that we've done with organizations, we really see 5 common compliance pitfalls that companies could either knowingly or unknowingly find themselves in trouble. First would be the use of non-compliant third parties. This could be external service providers, cloud service providers, managed service providers from which you may be getting tools and services that don't meet the DFARS requirements, CMMC requirements. Second, and this is huge, lack of a written system security plan, lack of documentation. 3, failure to implement all of the NIST 800-171 controls and objectives. Remember, 110 controls, 320 underlying objectives. All of those objectives need to be met for a control to be fully met. So if you've done a high-level assessment years ago, it might be time to work with someone and get a granular deep dive and document how you're meeting all of those objectives within those controls. 4, inaccurate or outdated compliance reporting. And then 5, changes to your IT environment and scope. This could be expanding your physical or network boundaries, acquiring a new facility or company, shifting from on-premise to cloud-based infrastructure, new tools, new vendors or systems without fully evaluating how that could change the scope of your environment, and then ensuring that that new scope is also assessed and fully meets compliance requirements. But we're going to dig a little bit more into the first one, and I'm going to pull Charlie in here. ESPs, CSPs, MSPs, a lot of initials there and acronyms. Charlie, can you help us dig in a little bit and shed some light on this?
Absolutely. So I'm kind of give you definitions on what is in the Title 32 rule. The only 2 that are in the Title 32 rule are cloud service providers, CSPs, and external service providers, ESPs. I'll give you the brief definition of what they are and then how they apply. So a cloud service provider is an external company that provides cloud services based on computing, whatever, but it's got to be convenient, on-demand access, shared pool of resources that can easily be spun up. So those examples are, network servers, storage applications, SaaS application services, things like that. Again, it's shared pool, easily spun up. An external service provider is more people, technology, facilities that an organization uses to provision and manage their cybersecurity services. So under CMMC, if there are CUI or SPD, which is basically security protection data, so that's log data, configuration data, it doesn't mean that its CUI is in it, but it supports the security of the system. It must be stored, processed, and transmitted on the ESP's assets. Then the provider is an ESP. Now, since I said CSPs, ESPs, a lot of people think, how do MSPs fit into it? So effectively, an ESP that is not a CSP is an MSP, okay, or an MSSP. If you go to the next slide. So let's talk about some of the questions, okay? So if you are utilizing an MSP or an MSSP, so you're going to have to answer these questions basically on number 2 and number 3. So if yes, are they providing services through the cloud? Are they on demand, easy to access? Are they providing you access to a shared pool of services? If they are a CSP. But if you're yes to 1, but no to 2, so then you're going to ask, well, does that MSP store, process, or transmit CUI or that security protection data that I just talked about? If yes, then they are an ESP. Go to the next slide. We'll drill down a little further. So your MSP or MSSP is a CSP. Now what? Okay. So if your CSP stores, processes, or transmits CUI. So if it's yes, these are the requirements below. So they are a CSP. So CSP requirements, FedRAMP moderate authorized or FedRAMP moderate equivalency. What that means is there is a FedRAMP marketplace, and there are specific requirements to meet FedRAMP authorization. Companies go through this, large companies like Microsoft, Amazon, whatnot. They go through these set of requirements. They get attestations from 3 PAOs. They go through certification assessments, specific pen testing requirements. They do all that, and then they're listed in the FedRAMP marketplace. There is an equivalency where you kind of do all of that except for the authorization part. All the same things apply. So your requirements as an OSC. So you've got to have the SSP. You have to have the CRM or SRM. So this is going to be a document that says, here are all the 110 controls. Here are all the 320 objectives. This is what I'm responsible for. And this is what my CSP says they're responsible for. And so when you're getting assessed, that CRM or SRM will be assessed as part of the organization. Okay. If we're going to the right side, if your CSP stores, processes, transmits SPD, then these are the requirements. Notice the FedRAMP requirements are removed. Okay, everything's the same, but the FedRAMP requirements are removed if you are a CSP that is only storing, processing, or transmitting SPD. That note below, FedRAMP requirements apply. I'm going to talk a little bit about that on the next slide, just to give you a little bit of an understanding here. Go to the next slide. So your MSP, MSSP is an ESP. Okay, so number one, left side, do they store, process, or transmit CUI? So ESP requirements, they must be CMMC level 2 certified. SSP must document the relationship with ESP, and then you also have to have that CRM or SRM that I mentioned. During your certification assessment, for either of these, well, let me step back. Let me do the right side first, and I'll go to the very bottom. So does your MSSP store, process, transmit security protection data? Again, they don't have to be level 2 certified because there's no CUI, but you still have to have an SSP with your relationship with them, and then the CRM or SRM. That details what they do and what they're responsible for, and what you're responsible for. So the reason I say this, so they can do voluntary CMMC certification assessments or whatever to make it easier on them and on you. But if they don't, during that assessment that you're going through, certification assessment, they're going to have to prove certification because they are part of your CRM and part of your SSP. The other thing I want to mention is if you're using multiple ESPs. So think of it this way. If they are a CSP and they're FedRAMP authorized, the assessor will look at that and just say, okay, I know they're FedRAMP authorized. I can move on. There doesn't have to be a representative from that organization. If they are not FedRAMP authorized, storing, processing, transmitting CUI, they're in your CRM, SRM, every single external service provider that is not FedRAMP authorized needs to be in that assessment with you. So just be aware of that if you're using multiple ESPs.
Yeah, Charlie, that sounds like a huge time commitment on the external service provider, making sure they're lined up and available.
Very much so.
All right, thank you. That was a lot of technical information. Again, please send in questions you may have in the Q&A. We can always follow up afterwards if we don't have time at the end. So Bob, can you walk us through how we may be able to help?
Absolutely. Thank you, Elizabeth. Thank you, Charlie. We work with a variety of different size organizations in different industries as it relates to compliance. Essentially, we look at these 4 steps, and you may be already at step 2 or step 3, and we can help in a variety of ways. But if you're just getting started, an initial readiness assessment where Charlie and his team have put together a survey of questions, you can provide our team with some information, and they can essentially hold up a mirror give you a gut check. Okay, based on what we see, we think you need to do some work here, here, and here. We know this tool is not compliant. This cloud-based service is not FedRAMP. Questions like that you can begin to start to work through. Where most organizations are finding themselves right now is stage 2 in the gap assessment process. This is that granular deep dive documenting all of the evidence to support meeting compliance and generating written information for a system security plan and POAMs, plans of action and milestones for any unmet requirements. From that, you can really begin to put together a customized remediation plan, as well as scoping what you're going to need for ongoing compliance and support that includes continuous monitoring. Yes, compliance is not a one-time snapshot. It is an ongoing steady state that, by the definition of the controls of NIST 800-171, requires continuous monitoring. That can also be a big lift for small businesses to take on themselves. Happy to discuss any of these with any of your organizations or your team members who may be working on compliance plan. But we do want to hone in on the gap assessment piece. Elizabeth, if you scroll to the next slide, if you have not already documented a system security plan or have POAMs for unmet requirements down to the objective level, it's highly encouraged that you engage with an RPO to conduct a gap assessment. Why an RPO? Why not a C3PAO? RPOs fulfill a very specific need in order to help organizations assess and meet compliance requirements. They can provide services, consulting, etc. C3PAOs are essentially just grading the homework, pass, fail. They can't consult on how you might meet those requirements. So before you're getting ready to go through that certification audit, taking this step, and again, if you look at those compliance pitfalls to the right, this can help address a lot of those, providing you the written documentation of your existing status, the environment, and identifying where you may be lacking and items that need remediation. So, in the spirit of Independence Day, with our organization being a DoD contractor, we are offering a discount on our gap assessment services. So if this is something that you find in need with you and your team, please reach out, contact us. We'd be happy to get you pricing, talk about how that could work, and get you on the schedule. Elizabeth, back over to you.
Yeah. Bob, Charlie, Jack, thank you guys so much. We got through a lot of information in 32 minutes. I know we're just 2 minutes over here. Bob's contact information is at the bottom of the slide here. Should you have follow-up questions, again, we'll send out the slide deck. But before we wrap it up, Bob, were there any key questions that you got that you want to try to answer now to make sure that everybody gets the benefit of our response?
So we did get a couple. Charlie's been answering them as we go along. One about a SPURS score and who would be held responsible for that. Is it the person submitting it? Is it the affirming official? It's the organization. But Charlie, also a question about if you have a current MSP, will they need to be at the same level as you? And could you just explain that again? There's a little clarifying question.
They would have to be at the same level or above. So if you're level 1, I mean, you want to do it, you're using their services. Obviously, if they're level 2 compliant, that's fine. But yes, they would have to be at the same level or above.
Elizabeth, last question that we've got, and I don't know that we addressed it up front. Yes, we will be sending out this information as well as the recording of this session, so everyone will have it, as well as our contact info. And please feel free to reach out if there's anything we can do to assist you.
Fantastic. Thank you all for attending. Charlie, Bob, Jack, thank you all. Make it a great day. Take care.